Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the first year, the first month of February. This year will be 25 years since History Byte started.
Wow.
Shout out to Sally and Ben Italy and Robert Johnson for getting the idea put together, and I've been helping with it for probably about 14, and I think this is my 10th year maybe. I had to go through some of Jim's research to see what was happening. So thank you all for coming. I feel very blessed to be here, to be part of this beautiful, beautiful library. We're so thankful for the Johann Fuss Foundation for agreeing for us to do that here. Bobby Marquis, Julianne over there, make sure it all runs smoothly. We've got Rick from Island TV doing the filming, and we have Alex over here, taking care of the sound system. So I think we're all in good shape. I have a few housekeeping announcements to make. One, on behalf of the Johann Fuss Library and the community, there is Island Book Blast on Saturday. We're so fortunate to have so many authors that live and come to Boca Grande, and all of them, I think everybody in person will be here on Saturday. The books will be for sale, and we'll be a speaker. So hopefully you make it. It starts at 11, it's 11 to 3, so you can come at any time. Be sure to pick up our information, our brochures for the History Center, the History Byte program, and everything else that's all around, all over. We've got lots of information. We are so fortunate, and if you haven't been here, I know some of my friends and the History Byte family are here, just arrived for the month of February. You've got to make sure you go see the new History Center. The History Center, we're still raising money for it, of course, as everyone is, but it's absolutely fantastic. It's not just a one-time visit. It's something you can go to over and over and over again and learn something new every day. Bring your family, tell your friends. It's definitely a great addition to all the programs. And without this community and all of these people, this would not have happened. This has been a plan for, I'm not sure. I met with Pam Haymans last week, and the past boards, there's been at least 3 different past boards that have been in the plan, and maybe not, maybe so, but Ian and Milton kind of helped it move along a little bit faster, I think, which is, good and bad news. But it's still, history is never complete, so it changes every day, and something new happens every day. So it's not finished. It's a work in progress. We are honoring 2 very special people today, and all month, Rosemarie and Jim Blaha, who are archive research team. And I had a nice visit with Rosemarie this week, many visits with her. It's always fun to go check in with her. But we talked about how they first came on board to the Historical Society. They decided to attend one of those end-of-the-year meetings that are always boring, and sometimes, you have to have it, and sometimes people come, sometimes they don't. Well, they decided to come, and they thought, well, maybe we might volunteer for something. Little did they know, a little over 10 years later, they volunteer, but their volunteer service is 52 weeks a year, 24 hours a day, I think. They put an office in their home, which was destroyed in Ian, but they're working hard on getting their home back together. They're still not in it, but they constantly are there. And as Rosemarie said, it's a gift for her and for Jim to be able to do this outreach in the community. It's definitely a gift for our community to have them so dedicated. Jim will be happy to show you all of his books, and he's got, 60, 65 or more notebooks that he's done research on. And I think it's real important that it's hands-on research. Some people can just get right on the computer and research and do things. A lot of people can't. I like to have a paper to look in my hand personally too. And so it's a good project for your grandchildren if they come to visit, for anybody to come to actually go and ask Jim or ask Rosemary or whoever's in there, what happened back in 1958. And you can probably, what happened was, what about the store that was called the Mercantile? He's got a book about it. He's got answers. If he doesn't have it, they'll look it up. So I think their resource and their gift to our community, our history community, is so, so important. And we're looking forward to many more years. Thank you. I also want to say that this is Black History Month, February Black History Month. And I know some of you know, but a lot of you don't. We had a very active Black community in Boca Grande. We've been working on researching the homestead that was in the middle of town, that was down on Palm Avenue area before Sunset moved them out and developed. We have not been able to find photographs or find a lot of history about it. If anybody happens to have anything, it was pre-60. I'd love to have information about that. When that was, those families were very much a part of my life. They worked in our community businesses. They worked for the families on the beachfront. That group, I went to school with some of them at later years, but that community was a very much heart and soul a part of our town. Then we had the community down at the south end of the island that worked for the railroad, for the phosphate. They had a set of houses there too, and they mostly worked all for the seaboard, for that department. But some of the women worked in town and worked for the homes, or they took in ironing or what, And then we also had, when the downtown one closed up, then they moved to Tarpon Estates, which is no longer there either. So we really, do not have a unity of the Black community here. We have a lot of wonderful Jamaicans here that are working in our businesses, and they're all just precious and sweet. And we have, other ones here, but it's not the way it was when I was growing up. It was a real community, and we were all interactive in that same community. So I just wanted to bring that to a point, and I know we've got lots of books and lots of things. We have a whole panel on some of the Black history at our History Center. I also want to mention that Kim Kyle had worked for us for over 20 years. She's very much part of the founding in the beginning. She came on in the very beginning of the History Center, and Sally and Ted hired her, and she worked out of a tiny little closet that now is a cloakroom or something at the community house. And they moved, worked out of Sally and Ted's house, and she was with us for 20 years. She's very instrumental in helping us move on and grow, and she was researched on 3 of the books that we've had printed, and was very much part of this history community. She decided in December that she was going to move on and to another situation, and so we're proud of her. We just want to mention that she was a great integral part of our community also. So if you miss Kim, she might be around later, but she's taking a little break. Cindy Crispo is out front here, and Scott Shiley. Cindy is now working in the office. She came to work with under Kim for a couple years, and she's doing a great job, and she's learning the ropes as we speak. There's a lot to do there. The History Center is open daily except Sundays this time of year. We've got all that information on there. So Rick is there most mornings in the actual History Center part of it, and Jim and Rosemary are there in the afternoon. So please stop in. I think I'm almost done with our announcements. Just so looking forward, 4 weeks in February. Thank you all for coming and supporting us. We've got a beautiful day. We've got this great tent. There's functions at the library every week. There's a whole schedule of what the library is doing over there. But it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Michael Haymans. He's attorney at law in Charlotte, Lee County, Sarasota County, all over. And I know Michael for many years and knew his family. They were friends of my family, and we kind of all grown up in the same beautiful community that we can remember what it was like before the changes that we've seen in the last 15 years or so. So Michael's going to speak to us. by song and poetry. Thank you, Michael.
I'm going to, there are people here who know the details of the dates and the names and the places better than I do. I know the big pictures and some specific perspectives on some of the things for Boca Grande. I grew up in Punta Gorda and still live there, but people when they see me out here in Boca Grande, they say, "So what? You live in Punta Gorda. What are you doing out here?" I said, "Boca Grande is part of the community. When I grew up, we were all part of it. I mean, the kids from here went to Charlotte High School, if you can imagine that. They got on the bus or they drove. They didn't always make it to school if they drove their own cars. But John's Knight and I were in the same class at Charlotte High School in Punta Gorda. We were on the wrestling team together. Both of the Spurgeons were on the wrestling team. And there's just a lot of interconnection that had to do with that. And then I became a lawyer with a Farr law firm, and so Earl Drayton Farr Jr. Lived out here in Boca Grande for years. Of course, represented Sunset Realty, did all of the closings for the CSX, represented the Nicholas family, and so Drayton's passed, and I still am involved with the Nicholas family things, and so I'm going to tell you some stories about the bayou and the yacht basin, which I have some particular knowledge about. But I'm going to give you a little bit of a romp through time here, if you'll stick with me for it. Way out here on the edge of everything, way out here on the edge of everything, cats come and go. Way out here on the edge of everything, waves crash on the beach. Sun, moon, rise and sets, stars shine in between. Head up in the sky, wet sand beneath my feet. In the slurry mix of elements, hunters, crabs, and angels feast. Birds dive and they swim. Fish jump and they roll. Smell the red tide on the wind. See the green flash offshore. There's been people here for a long, long time in this area. And it's a maritime area, I mean, because of all of the water, the Charlotte Harbor, what we call it now, and Gasparilla Sound, Pine Island Sound, Usepa. When the folks that were here, the Calusa and the Timucua, the boundary between their two domains was really Charlotte Harbor, and so the Timucua is a linguistic group that north of Charlotte Harbor, all the way up into the Jacksonville area, and not the same tribe, but the same linguistic group, and which was their connection. The Calusa were to the south of Charlotte Harbor, down through Marco, and even as far across the Everglades to Miami. They took tribute from the Tequesta that were there, and so when the first contact happened in 1523, the Spaniards' first contact from Europeans, when they came into the harbor, as they came into Boca Grande Pass, there was a report that there were at least 5,000 people that inhabited the area that you could see from just inside the pass. And that was primarily at Pineland, there where the Randall Research Center is. If you haven't been there, I really highly recommend that. Randall Research Center in Pineland. And they tell a great story through the archaeology that they've done there about how these people lived and the midden mounds that were developed across centuries of time. And they can even see the climate changes that happen in the sea level differentiation during the different times that they can tie back to to European records of climate differences that happen, the Vandal minimums, and there's some maximums and such. And so you can see how people related to their environment and how they related to the sea level itself and how they fed themselves. And they were primarily, they harvested the fish and the shellfish in these harbors, in these shallow waters. And they did it not just by hunting and fishing in general. They used their middens, as it were. As a matter of fact, Hamilton Cushing, an archaeologist in the 1890s who came and in some ways really discovered things, and in some ways probably decimated a lot of what areas that could be properly excavated for archaeology these days, but found all kinds of things. But what he found was that the people that were here had developed these middens not just as a trash heap, but they developed the middens where they were and lived to make harbors, to make little coves that were fish traps and places to hold things, so that when they went out fishing that they didn't have to eat straight hand to mouth, but could put it, and because they didn't have the same ways to store, but they would store things live. And so a lot of these midden mounds and the islands that are near and around those midden mounds are fish holding areas. And when you start thinking about it that way, you can start seeing it. A little bit of it, particularly there just at the south end of Usepa, you start seeing in some of those shallow areas the beginnings of what might have been these holding places. Well, so the Calusa fought off they already had known that the Spaniards were mistreating people that they had met 1492 and on down in the Caribbean. And so they were suspicious of and didn't want them. And actually the very first contact, there was a battle. And then they left and came back later, and of course Juan Ponce de Leon was shot in Charlotte Harbor and ultimately made it back to Cuba, but died from his wound that he had received. So the Calusa were called the Fierce Ones. And when when the Spaniards got here and coming back, what they learned was that at Usepa was the head cat at the time who lived on Usepa with his family and was sort of the dominant chief in this northern area of the Calusa. That Usepa was called Tampa. And so there's a high likelihood that Tampa Bay was misnamed because they mistook it for the place where Tampa was Usepa. And so the names make some difference. So the names that we have, there's very little in the way of ancient Indian names here, although Calusa Hatchie, that's the Calusa River. So when you say Caloosahatchee River, you're being redundant. So you can just say Caloosahatchee, there's not much that remains except for these archaeological things. And so one of the things that is helpful in historic preservation and historic education is having some image or some effigy to the things that were in the past in order to be able to wrap your imagination around it a little bit and something tangible to hold to. And so in Punta Gorda, as you come into Punta Gorda across the river on that southbound US 41, and on the corner of Retta Esplanade and US 41 South, there's a carving. It was done by Peter Wolf Toth. He calls them his whispering giants, and that carving that he has there is there's a maiden that's facing to the north and a brave that's facing to the south, and there's a buffalo, because there really were buffalo in Florida in the early days. It hadn't been for a long, long time, but in northern Florida, not down here in the swamplands. But there were buffalo, and so there's an eagle and a buffalo, and these symbols and icons of indigenous folks. And the guy who carved it, Peter Wolf Toth, he carved one of these kinds of effigies, these whispering giants, in each of the 50 states in the United States. And he's done one in Europe. He was born in Hungary and came as a child and grew up in Ohio. But he became enamored with this notion of the indigenous people and needing to have something for people to glom onto, to wrap their imaginations around. And so he's got these whispering giants. He is right now in the Amazon basin doing a carving for the Amazon folks there. He's a friend of mine. When he came to Punta Gorda and first carved it in the early 70s, Fred Babcock Jr. had commissioned him to do the carving, and it was there. It was out of an old ear tree that Miss Marion McAdow, the wife of Perry McAdow, she had planted exotic trees, planted the banyan tree that's in Punta Gorda and such. But that it was carved out of that, and after Hurricane Charlie, it had been some damage, and the new owner wanted to move it out of their parking lot there, and so it got moved by the city of Punta Gorda over onto the corner where it is now and set up. And Peter Wolf Toth came and refurbished it and took some of the rot that was happening in it and did some fill and such as that. And while he was there, some friends of ours let him use a little pulled-behind trailer that he stayed in right there on the job site. And then he would come to dinner and for showers and such at other folks' homes. And so that's how I became friendly with him, was just after Hurricane Charlie. And I've been to his place up in Smyrna is where he lives. But he said, "Mike, would you name this whispering giant for me?" And so I got the opportunity to put together that story about the Calusa brave and the Timucuan maiden, because what was happening at the time back in those days was there were marriages of alliance. And so in my imagination, the maid has been married off to this Calusa brave, and she's looking back to her homeland across the Peace River, Charlotte Harbor, to her homeland, and the Calusa is looking back to his domain, to the south part. And so when you drive into Punta Gorda, take a look on your right as you pull in just after the very first street over the bridge, and you can see Calusa Timucua. That's the whispering giant. So this place was decimated by the Calusa were run out because they eschewed European goods. They didn't have weapons. They didn't take up the weapons and such. And so there was, in the 1600s, there was a time when the British had hired mercenary indigenous people, Indians, the Yamasee, out of what we now know as South Carolina, and they hired them, paid them commissions, fees, armed them with weapons, and for about 60 years there was these continuous slave raids by the Yamasee coming down and capturing Calusa and really in ultimately driving them from this area and down into the Keys, and ultimately the last of what we know of is the Calusa escaped to Cuba, and there's a birth that's documented in one of the churches across the bay at Havana Harbor that was the last known full-blooded Calusa to be born and documented. But so what that left was a vacuum of down here, and that's what the Seminoles are. They're the runaway slaves and the Creeks that were trying to avoid the Trail of Tears and trying to get away from the domination of European expansion. That was a lot of them tried to assimilate, to take on the behaviors and social norms, but they weren't accepted, and even those that were fairly successful in the short term were ultimately driven and put on reservations. One of my favorite stories about the folks who were driven from here by the United States government and taken to Oklahoma was that some of them came back, and people said, "Oh, why'd you come back?" I said, "Well, out there's no lighter wood. I don't know if you build fires around here. The hearts of pine in a dead pine tree, the sap will go to the center and make a very, very rich, hard pine that is match-like. It's flammable. As a matter of fact, some of you may have houses with floors that are built out of hard pine. And so it's match-like. Be careful. Keep your fire extinguisher. But so that's the Calusa. But that vacuum, what they got left is some of them came back up and fished here, and there was fish ranchos that were stilt structures on the water that they would come seasonally to for the big mullet runs, and they came out of Cuba and they would fish, and they had all kinds of nets and things. They were fairly adept at not only trapping but netting fish, and these ranchos were spotted around in Charlotte Harbor, and they would catch fish, and some of them were taken to Cuba in double-hulled boats, so that the outer hull had holes in it so that the water could get in, and then the inner hull kept the water out. And so these double-hulled boats, they would take live fish back down to Cuba. But they also salted fish, dried and salted fish. And so that's what some of those ranchos were. And that was the system here, because this was wilderness. This was the end of everything. And that didn't change until the railroad came. And so railroad is an important part of the story of this area. Not only of Boca Grande with the phosphate docks and how all that worked, but Punta Gorda, and as a matter of fact, how it changed and it left Punta Gorda out of the story at a point along the way. And so when the railroad came to Punta Gorda in 1887, it was the first passengers that were on it. So it came 85, 86, they were there doing surveying. Some important names were part of all that. One of the surveyors for the railroad as it came down to Punta Gorda from Bartow was Albert Gilchrist. So Gilchrist, we've got the name that's here. He ended up being an important part. I'll move ahead just a little bit and tell you some of them since I've brought his name up. But Gilchrist quit the railroad and started doing land speculation here in Southwest Florida. And he ended up getting a job doing a government survey over here in Boca Grande on Gasparilla Island. And he was paid with land. And so some of the land that's developed there, particularly in south the main part of Boca Grande, so south on down, a lot of that was owned by Albert Gilchrist. And so we've got his name that is appended to this place. And he became a legislator, and then he became the governor of Florida. So from this area, we have had a governor, and it was Albert Gilchrist in the early 1900s. He was, and there's all kinds of names, but that the railroad's the important part. Once the railroad hit, it also coincided with the development of the ability to make ice in grand quantities and commercially. And so, and at one time, the largest ice plant in the world was in Punta Gorda. And that was there in order to provide ice for the fish to be chilled and put in boxcars and taken to northern cities for their distribution and sale. And so there became a system of fishing here that developed, that took some of the ideas from the fishing ranchos, and so there would be a run boat that would come from Punta Gorda with ice and supplies and come down, and the further you got away from Punta Gorda, there would be an ice house. And that was a central place that they provided the ice, and then they picked up the fish and they dropped people off. It was a maritime ferry for the commercial fishing folks. And so the railhead had hit. As soon as the railhead hit, they built a big fancy hotel in order to be at the end of the line for people to come, and then that allowed not only the commerce, but it also started inviting folks who were looking for leisure and adventure and hunting and fishing. And so it became a central part of that. And in doing that, as the run boats would go out and go to an ice house, so like in Bull Bay, right there in the entrance to Bull Bay, that one on the left as you go in, any of you have been on the water there, that's an ice house. The other ones that are interior in Bull Bay are residential. They were either a fish camp that was built, and some of these were built so that they could be moved, so that you get a barge in under them at low tide, and then build, stack up and make the brace, and then as the tide came up, they would lift them up off, and then they would move to another location where they were following the fish and where they were doing the fishing. Some of them never moved. The ice houses stayed where they were. There were also things that were called lighters, which is just a barge tied to a piling. So the piling would be set, and then a barge tied to it that would float, and that's where these fishermen stayed, so they didn't have to go back and forth to the town. Because back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, this is the switch over from sail to steam and then naphtha powered engines. So they were burning a petroleum product, but it was naphtha. It wasn't gasoline or diesel yet. And so and it was a pretty big run to go and do that. And so you'd lose a lot of time and energy. And so people came down and fished and lived where they fished. Well, where there weren't uplands that you could stay on, there would be this ice house and then these associated residential structures. Where there was an upland, like at Punta Blanco, just the island just north of Cabbage Key, that was actually a community. There was people that lived there. There was an ice house, you can see the burnt remnants of it out there next to the Intracoastal. But there was actually, for a time, there was a rail down into the water, so a boat pull to pull things out and be able to work on them. There was a school. There was actually a school boat that ran between the residential structures and the islands to bring kids there to that island to go to school, and so in that run boat system, that if there was uplands, there would just be the ice house. Where there was not the uplands, there would be an ice house within the residential structures. And so Pine Island Sound, if you go down, and so just about due east from Captiva Pass, there's a string of structures that were the old residential shacks. The one that was the ice house was initially on the west side of Captiva Shoal, and then got moved after it. The commercial industry stopped, and it went into they didn't need to do the runboat system anymore. In the 1950s, there was refrigeration, and boats were able to get where they needed to go and that kind of thing. Didn't have to stay down the bay anymore. And so they were all sold or given to prominent people and families in the area. And they had one condition: they couldn't be used for commercial fishing purposes. And the ice house that was there at Pine Island got moved, raised up and moved, and settled inside where there wasn't the same deep water, so as to make absolutely sure that there wasn't going to be any commercial use of them. And that one along with the Punta Blanco one were burnt in the mid-1990s, just after the net ban, the constitutional enactment of the net ban in the state of Florida. And some of the commercial fishermen that in that lost their livelihood probably went in retribution and burnt some of them down. I mean, nobody's ever been arrested for it, but that's the story of it. And the state was decided that they were on sovereign submerged lands, and they were squatters and weren't allowed to be there. Now, understand that these fish camps and shacks had been part of a fishing industry that in World War I, if you were a fisherman, you got, in this harbor, you got a deferment. You didn't have to go to war because you were providing food for the war effort. That was in World War I and World War II. So thereafter, that system changed, and then as what happens when you don't have a good historical perspective is people forgot what they were about and why they had been there. And they characterized them, in Tallahassee, the state of Florida, characterized them as squatters and started posting them and started burning them down themselves. And so the owners got together. I was a young attorney at the Farr Law Firm. Drayton had been an owner of one of these camps, shacks in Pine Island Sound, and his wife Paula had decided that it was too rustic finally at some point in their lives to be going down there to these shacks. And so he wasn't going as often, and so he gave his interest to Edward Hendrickson, his Gulf Shore Seafood, crabbing and fishing and shrimping business, and his buddy from childhood. They'd owned it together, and he just gave that to him. And so we get to stay in that one as a kid, and then later on, ultimately through a series of more detailed than you need, I became one of the owners of that. And so I still get to go to these fish shacks, one in Pine Island Sound and one in Bull Bay that I'm part of. The one in Bull Bay we formed an organization, a not-for-profit corporation to own it and maintain it, Home of the Silver King Tarpon, Inc. The one in Captiva Shoals, on Captiva Shoals, is called Historic Captiva Shoal Fish Shack, Inc. And so I'd written a couple of songs, as a matter of fact. We got them on the National Register of Historic Places to get the state to stop burning them. And that worked. And we got grandfather registration for a while, and then finally one of the owners of the fish shack, John Laurent out of Bartow, was a legislator in the state of Florida at the time, and he got some legislation passed that said that if you were on the National Register or qualified for the National Register, then, and you were existed prior to 1972, that in doing that you could get a fish camp lease from the state of Florida. And so And so we now lease the bottom land that we have these camps on from the state of Florida. It's not a lot of money, it's some, and it gives them allows them their proprietary control as well as regulatory control over it. And so the very first song that we did was a protest song. Johnny Cole and I wrote it, and it was them old state fighting blues. Watching the water flow in, watch it flow away. Well, we're sitting on the fish shack, whiling away the day. Oh, when the night comes, the stars shine. We sit on the dock and play. Well, we're talking about our worries, whether we get to stay. When the state comes to burn us, what are we gonna say? Well, I'll stop you bullies. There's got to be some better way. Well, you know the fish shacks been here a long, long time. Yeah, you know the fish shacks been here a long, long time. It'd be a shame to lose them. They give us a sense of time. Well, we're talking about our worries, whether we get to stay. When the state comes to burn us, what are we gonna say? Well, I will stop. And it worked. It actually worked. We saved them. And they've been, just as you were damaged and beaten and battered in Hurricane Milton and in the Ian and such, most of the camps and shacks in Charlotte Harbor were destroyed in Milton, floated up, popped off their pilings, and floated and blown into the mangroves. And so everybody that I know is in the process or have rebuilt those, so that they, again, part of my theme is they give a tangible way to remember the history. It gives you something to wrap your imagination around. So in those so that's a fishing line of activity all the way up to our present time with the folks. And when the net band went in, Earl Farr had been the founder of the Farr Law Firm, Drayton's father. Earl at one time was the Charlotte County attorney, the city of Punta Gorda attorney at the same time, Charlotte County attorney, Punta Gorda attorney, and he was the general counsel for the Game Commission for the state of Florida. And during that time when he was the attorney for the state, for the Game Commission, we stopped as a society. We stopped harvesting deer for commercial purposes. You can't buy deer unless it's been farm raised someplace, Colorado or something. But you can't go and kill a deer and then sell it and to a restaurant and eat a wild venison in a restaurant, because they needed to manage it. It was being over harvested. It was a problem. With the net ban that happened around here in the 1990s, people weren't willing to wait for the legislature to act, and they thought that the legislature wasn't acting quickly enough, and that the mullet fishing, the entangling nets were destroying the resource, or over harvesting the fish. They were being harvested, and still the mullet roe, the eggs in the late fall, early winter, are the most valuable part of the fish. As a matter of fact, My socks are mullet row. These are mullet row. So this strike our nets upon the water, catch fish for all to eat. Weather, wind, waves, tide, seasons, hungry folks crowd round to feed. All the mess, each mouthful it makes, the catch, fresh seafood it rakes. The lives that we all take, I fish for you. You fish for me. I fish for me and my family. We fish for you. Build your houses on the water, dredged canals and moored docks and dredged canals. Mangroves gone, bays polluted. Whose fault is lousy fishing now? All the mess that we all make, the catch, food and sheltering rate, the lives that we all take, I fish for you. You fish for me, I fish for me and my family. We fish for you. Cast your bait upon the water, order mullet at the cafe, feed the masses or just your family. You fish for work or for play. All the mess that we all make, the catch, fresh seafood it rakes, the lives that we all take, I fish for you. You play for me, I fish for me and my family. Fish for me and my family. I fish for me and my family. We fish for you. We fish for you. I wrote that one during a campaign about the ban the nets, and that one didn't work. That one they passed that constitutional amendment anyway, and a lot of families, a lot of the historic the families that all of these communities were built upon the shoulders and backs of, those families' livelihoods were gone. They tried to provide some alternatives and some you can grow some clams and that kind of thing. That didn't work out so well, you know. But so that I think that the lack of historic understanding about the importance of that system, that ability to do that got taken from us. The railroad, when it hits Punta Gorda, Punta Gorda was the southernmost terminus of the railroad in 1887. And it was that way until it got to Fort Myers in early 1900s, like 1904 or something. Scott Shively, by the way, he knows all of these dates very well. And so, and the resources that you have, you can find the specific dates. I'm broad brushing here a little bit, so don't hold me to a specific date, except for 1887 Punta Gorda. I know that one. But so Punta Gorda was connected to the world through not only the railroad, but the maritime industry, because all of this area was only connected by water until that railroad started providing the connection. And then there was bridges built and roads built in the early parts of 1900s through about 1930 kind of deal, the Tamiami Trail ultimately across the Everglades, all of that. But mostly people got around here by boat, and that's how cargo and mail came and that kind of thing. And so the maritime part of it was important. There was actually the Morgan steamship line from Havana to New Orleans had a stop in Punta Gorda once the railroad hit. And so we were that connected in Punta Gorda. That's one of the reasons that Punta Gorda had a service industry, a luxury hunting and fishing area. It was a connection point. So there were cattle and fishing and hunting and fishing service industry kinds of people. And one of the things that happens with that is that Punta Gorda is a very welcoming place. I don't know if you spend any time there, but it's there's a heartbeat of good cheer and welcome that happens in Punta Gorda in and around its historic residential district and its historic commercial area. And so before there was prohibition, you had to have local approval to be able to drink. And so there was, just because there wasn't a national prohibition, there were local prohibitions to this all. And so this next story is really about that connectivity of Punta Gorda in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Scott Shively, I'm going to throw him under the bus again. Scott went and did a huge research on this guy Henry Little in Punta Gorda, and there's a document about this thick that he's written about it, and his final conclusion is we don't really know much about Henry Little. And this is the story of that. How are we doing on time? Am I doing okay?
You're good.
Okay. Y'all okay? We're doing all right? Okay. So, Henry Little was an animal trainer, circus conductor, spectacle creator. He made blind tiger whiskey out on the sand, blessed with the pines and palmettos, meet man Charlotte Harbor, Peace River, Punta Gorda. 1890s, black man came to town, to the end of the railroad line, to the port, Punta Gorda, where there was a Morgan steamship line. From Havana to New Orleans, stopped in Punta Gorda along the way. Seemed like a good place to stop for a menagerie to stay. You see, Henry Little was an animal trainer, circus conductor, spectacle creator. He made blind tiger whiskey out on the sand. That's where the pines and the palmettos meet. Mango, Charlotte Harbor, Peace River, Punta Gorda. Had a dog, a little white one, taught to be a real watchdog. Climb up on the roof, see all the people bark like hell when Marshall Bowman come round. Oh, 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 oh. march like in the parade. Sent to town, that was the signal, the batch was ready. Come on all the people, it's the Punta Gorda Liquor Parade. Come on everybody. See, that bird would march, that bird would prance, that bird would dance, some kind of courtship thing. You see, Henry Little was an animal trainer, circus conductor, spectacle creator. He made like tiger whiskey out on the sand, that's where the pines and palmettos meet. Mango Charlotte Harbor, Peace River, Punta Gorda, it's the Punta Gorda Liquor Parade. Come on everybody! So, the rail stopped being in Punta Gorda because the crusty guy, Tribune, didn't get along with, he first got the rail to come and then it caused him a problem because of his irascibility. And so be nice to one another, it pays off because people get retribution if you're not. And so ultimately Tampa became the port for the deep water rather than Punta Gorda, and that changed everything. And then about the same time, the rail was brought to Boca Grande, and that was in order to have the deep water port here at Boca Grande in order to ship phosphate to the rest of the world. And so when that came, that changed Boca Grande significantly. I mean, that's when it all started, because until then there were just some fish camps from the commercial fishing, Pekin Cove up here at the north end, I think, and then up in Inglewood at Minnesota Key, Palm Ridge they called it before they called it Minnesota Key, and then the fish camps in the but the rail hit, and so the pebble phosphate, particularly in the Peace River Valley that had been identified and started to be harvested and started being shipping in a barge to Punta Gorda, and then moved into bigger ships to move out. Those ships weren't big enough, and they ended up bypassing Punta Gorda and started sending phosphate here, so it went to the phosphate docks. And so those phosphate docks there's just the remnants of them down there. I remember when it was still working. I remember when there were international sailors were on the island. I can't say South Beach without first going through my mind Laugh a Lot. And so during the time of the Laugh a Lot, you could find Russian sailors and people from all over the world. Greeks. It was very, very cosmopolitan, and we've lost that part of it. But in doing that, what happened was that there was a decision by the American Agricultural and Chemical Corporation to develop this island as a place for folks to come to have vacations, to do the sport fishing. At the same time, the tarpon fishing had become the sport of kings and such, and so from this place there was intended to be northern industrialists, wealthy northern industrialists really, and their yachts, to be able to come here, and they needed a place, and the folks that were coming from the railroad, and as part of that now, the end of the railroad and this beautiful island, to take advantage of it, they saw this land boom possibility in it, and so the American Agricultural and Chemical Company caused the Boca Grande Yacht Basin and most of the bayou to be dredged for fill, for Gasparilla Inn, for the railroad itself. And so as a matter of fact, in the Narrows up here, just a little bit north of here, that's been overwashed by a couple of hurricanes back in the 1800s and early 1900s. And so they needed the fill to rebuild the railroad grade there and that kind of thing. And so they were up to that. And so that part of the story is really important for how the dredging and and how I came to know a lot about the history of the waterways, the internal waterways here in Boca Grande, because just as I had been an attorney and worked on the saving the fish camps and houses by helping getting them on the National Register of Historic Places, I was the attorney for Boca Grande Marina when we got the dredge permission to re-dredge the entrance to the bayou, this south entrance to the bayou, and the yacht basin back to its original -7 feet. So the state had taken a position that the yacht basin and the bayou were all natural bodies of water. And so we were trying to get a fast track permit to do that. We were going to use a dredge and pitch it right there, right where right next to where it was, and that was going to benefit everybody. And the state said, no, you're not allowed to do that because we own it, and you've got to go through this whole long process, this years and years process, and we were going to lose that opportunity. Well, we lost the opportunity. We ended up suing the state of Florida in a declaratory decree, and we didn't get to court because they finally agreed with us that it was not, that it most likely, they never said it's not. They said, well, it most likely, we probably can't prove that it was a natural body of water in 1845 when the state of Florida became a state. So 1845 is an important time. Just as I'm passing through it, galloping by, we're in Lee County here, in Charlotte County's north end. Well, it all used to be Manatee County at one point, north of, well, let me back up. It all used to be Monroe County. There was just 5 counties when the state of Florida was formed and made 5 counties, and then all the other 62 have been created since then. But so Monroe County, this was in Monroe County, as right on up the coast was in Monroe County. Very little uplands parts to it. All maritime, all of the water access things were Monroe County, and that was out of Key West. And so, first thing that happened was that Manatee County was formed out of portions of Monroe County, and then that cut was right here at this line on Gasparilla. That's where the Manatee County got cut out. And so things north of that were Manatee County, and then later on, Manatee County became Sarasota, Charlotte, DeSoto, and such. And so this was still Monroe County, and then Lee County got carved out of Monroe County, and that's how this portion of the island became Lee County. Was it used to be Monroe, and it was a remnant of Monroe County from when Manatee was cut out earlier. I digressed on that one. So when and so 1845, it was the state said it was submerged lands, and so a young attorney, Michael Haymans, I was sitting in the office with Archie Grant of Johnson Engineering, who does most of the surveying and engineering on this island. DMK does some, there's a few others, but really the bulk of it across the years has been Johnson Engineering out of Fort Myers. And Archie Grant and Drayton Farr were in my office, and we were sitting there talking about what strategies we were going to do to try to get this permit that we needed. And Drayton had given me a chart one time that I framed it and put it on my office wall, and it was there on my office wall, and I'm sitting there talking to Drayton and to Archie, and I'm looking at the chart, and well, there's no bayou, and there's certainly no access right there. There's no yacht basin that's shown on the chart, and this was from information from 1859 through later on just after the Civil War, and this, remember, wartime. Actually, I have to tell you, a lot of this, Boca Grande, a series of historical essays by Charles Dana Gibson. You should have that in your library if you don't. He uses some primary source from the American Agricultural and Chemical Company to document when the dredges happen and when all of these kinds of things happen, and cites to aerial photographs and such as that. Well, I'm sitting there looking at this chart that is pre-1900, and I'm looking at it while I'm talking to him. I said, look at this. There's no connection here. And so we went to work and went and got the original government survey, and there's a section corner for 4 sections that's right there in the basin. And when you get to those pages in the original government survey notes, it says what they did to get there and what they did to get there, and they used a mangrove stub to mark that section corner, that 4 corners of that section that came together there. And so with aerial photographs and historical documentation about when the dredge happened, we ended up convincing, and let me tell you, I read just about every document that had to do with initial contact for this area, trying to find somebody that said that they were in that basin. There was no such thing. There was no basin there until there were a series of dredges, about 4 dredges, about 1910 to 1926. There were a series of 4 dredges, and so we ended up getting the state to agree that that it most likely wasn't part of the. As a matter of fact, since then, the finger canals that come off the basin, we've had to show them that also was man-made in a couple of places, and right there where the basin was. So ended up getting Whidden's Marina, that had been paying lease fees to the state of Florida for their submerged land. We got them to retract. We got money back from the state for that. Other people who were on that portion of the basin there, just where those finger canals are, we got at least 3 different folks to not have to get submerged land leases, didn't have to deal with the state in their proprietary position, and only had to deal with regulatory matters. And Lee County used to also have a rule that it treated, whether you were on a natural body of water or a man-made body of water, treated you differently for how many dock slips that you could have with Lee County. And they fixed that because we taught them too well what the problem was. And so they ended up changing that. But so Loomis Cut over here was dredged out in order to allow the ferry to get here back before we had the causeway and all of that. So I think I'm going to do you one last song and get out of here. And thank you for your patience with me on this. But over in Bull Bay, there was the folks that I have one of those camps with, and they call them camps in Bull Bay, and we call them shacks in Pine Island Sound. Let me tell you, they're no longer shacks. But so the fish camps in Bull Bay. So I was there with my buddies, and these are a bunch of people that we went to high school together, Charlotte High School, home of the Silver King tarpon. We all know how to spell tarpon. How do you spell tarpon, Johns? Tarpons, tarpons. So they said, well, Mike, you've written songs about those other fish camps, shacks, you'll call them. Well, how about write us one for ours? And so that's how this one got started. So. Bull Bay, Charlotte Harbor, Cape Hayes near Boca Grande, home of the Silver King tarpon. From Punta Gorda, run a boat down. There's an ice house in the throat of the bay. Camps and lighters where the fishermen stay. Hey, hey, down the bay, down the bay. Kayapaloo, is it hated? Pirate treasure or Temucan bones? Mounds, mounds and mounds of men, gumbo limbo where the turtle grass grows. Thunder-legged mangroves, high tide, redfish feed. Trout and grassy flats and sandy holes. Hit on jigs. Hey, hey, down the bay, down the bay. How do you get there? Yeah, how do you get back? Inside, 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 outside. Go all the way around Devilfish Key. Head north, Fort Placida, Gasparilla Sound to Coral Creek. The flatboats jump the bar. Zing they fly. Kite paddle or seaplane dips its wing in a pelican dives. Working the tide. Hey, yeah, down the bay. Mullet, mullet, schools and schools of mullet. Stopped gillnet a long time ago. Now there's trout, redfish, and snook. That's a grand slam, don't you know? Turtle Bay oysters, roasting on the beach. Camp Paul back at camp, cooking Ware Bay copper or painted. Sunset feast. I think I'll have a drink. Hey, yeah, down the bay, yeah, down the bay. Thank you very much for the fine honor.